Welcome to this store visualizer session covering planograms and consumer insight module. So the purpose of this is to give you a quick and efficient way how to demo these two components. Obviously, emphasis more on the consumer insight module. So application-wise, I am using the latest and greatest 18.1 store visualizer. Notice that there's also a store visualizer satellite app, which will enable satellite locations to capture data, do data acquisition, and send that to the main company to analyze data at remote locations. So that's pretty powerful. Okay, let's get started. So the way I demo this is by bringing in a standard store environment. So let's go ahead and zoom in on this wall. This is where we're going to place our planogram. It's going to take a little bit of time to import this. So how do you import a planogram? Always tricky. Click on the tools bar and make sure that the planogram icon is activated. Notice as you're activating this right here, the planogram shows up. And then again, when selecting this, you'll now have the ability right here to import planograms. So for this demonstration, we're going to import a beverage aisle. Notice this is a CSV, comma separated value file, which when we display this, you can see that this consists of different products, each column representing brand, sub-brand, manufacturer, so different pieces of metadata for each of these different SKUs. So without further ado, let's go ahead and open this. We're just going to accept the standard options right here, and that is going to bring in the planogram. So it's going to generate all the different product models that were specified in that comma separated value file. And then afterwards, we have the ability to also bring in the actual 3D live models and link those up with the ones that are specified in that CSV file. So instead of working with thin two-dimensional representations of those different SKUs, we can actually bring in the real 3D model of each of these SKUs. So the whole idea behind the consumer insight module is to be able to capture focus areas where consumers will be looking. In a traditional demo environment, I'm assuming none of us have a real HTC 5 Pro eye tracker, for example. Those can be pretty expensive. So for this demonstration, we're going to do this low cost, just using the regular keyboard and looking around that way. Now that's going to limit us in that we'll not be able to look at the gazes because that's only supported for those eye trackers. That's a little bit of a limitation. So if you don't want that limitation, you can start off from a predefined store visualizer file that you can load in, as opposed to starting from the planogram that what I'm doing here. And that one will have, observers, a data set in there that was captured with an eye tracker. So anyway, long story short, let's go ahead and start placing now our beverage aisle. So as you can see, I'm using the place icon right here, and I'm rotating this using my mouse. But honestly, I have no idea if as I'm rotating this aisle is now facing forward or not. right? And I don't know that until I analyze right here the model browser. Now we can unclip that from the menu, and we can see right here, for example, that this big green arrow is pointing to the front of the aisle. So that way I know that that green arrow represents indeed the front. No worries, we can always rotate this. So I can use my rotate and then lock the Z-axis in there. Also, as I am rotating this, it's kind of difficult to see where are we actually positioning this. So that's where I would recommend to go into the store view. And then with the store visualization view, you can set the height. Right here, you can move over to the side, and you are able to rotate that model. So going back to the rotation, we can rotate that and make sure that that is aligned right with the wall, the back wall right there. Okay. So I can set my view height. I can hit my space bar, come over to this side, zoom out again a little bit, hit my space bar, go back here, go to the rotation tab and make sure, that my aisle is aligned properly. So again, selecting it. And let's go ahead and move it a little bit. So we move it right up against the wall to get all situated. So you can leave again that mode by hitting the T button right there, or store layout view. So again, hitting your space bar and hitting your mouse button, mouse forward, you can start zooming in. Hitting the escape button gets you out of that view. So as we have the store, the very first thing obviously we want to do now, as I mentioned, is bring in the real 3D models. So how do you do that? Right here in the library menu, we hit the load button and we bring in the beverage models. Again, I'll include a link in the recording notes so you will be able to find this on the OneDrive location. So this is really a moment where you can now see these 2Ds being swapped out by their 3Ds counterparts. The mapping of that happens because we have set up here in properties, we have set up this 3D model linking right here. So you can set that up and match that up the way you link those 2Ds to those 3Ds, and that happens right here. Okay. Now that we're in this beverage aisle, what I also like to do is definitely use this feature called Randomizer, because in a real world, you will never see an aisle looking anything like this. So we will make this look a little more realistic by specifying random displacement in the horizontal vertical direction. Also give some rotation to each of these. And then using the regenerate button, we can kind of, give that more random nature to this. Now the clutter option makes it very realistic. So again, strength and variation can be altered, and regenerate allows you to finally get to a point where you say, okay, I like the way this store looks like. Now it's very important to lock in that store exactly the way you look at before you start doing your data acquisition. As soon as you make any change to your store, you remove items or you change the randomizer, then your data set is no longer in sync with your store, and you'll have to start the data acquisition again all over. So some more prep work before we can actually start is specifying the observer. So the very first data acquisition I'm going to make is an adult male, which is a male 65-inch camera height preset. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then one more thing is we are going to have to investigate if my CSV file had all the metadata that I want to display and eventually I want to generate statistics on. So how do you do that? Okay, so you're going to be jumping a little bit between these two menus. So in the actually, that will be right here. So the actual scene and the project. Okay, so as I, for example, pick a model, let me go to models right there. Yes. Okay, so I can select different models in here. So let's go to the, I can search for those as well. Let's look for Stella Artois right there, 50 centiliters can, which is this one right here in the center. So, as a matter of fact, this is the 2D card. So this is not the one I wanted. So let's look in assemblies right here, 3D models, right? So those are the ones. Those are the ones I want right there. So, and they're grouped. Perfect. This is the one, right? So you can see this is 3D. So if I select this one, I can switch now to my scene, scroll all the way down, and at the bottom here, you can see the model metadata for the selected SKU. So here we can again unclip this menu. With this, we have the ability to visualize that. So if you select an item and you select it here in the view, the little window here will appear showing you the metadata for the selected model by selecting this little view or height button. So as you can see, each of these models has metadata assigned to it. And again, that comes from the CSV file. We also have the ability to add additional metadata using the plus sign. And then adding the plus right here, we can pick from any of these field names, right? So for example, if we wanted to include for some reason the cost, internal cost for us, we could do that as well and add that piece of metadata right here to that SKU. Now, obviously, it'll be easier to do that up front and prep that so that we can display that properly when we are working with in a shopping cart mode. And what do I mean with shopping cart mode? Let's dive right into the consumer insight module by activating this little toggle here in the lower left-hand corner. The shopping cart mode is optimized or configured right here, as opposed to the eye tracker mode, right? So the eye tracker being HTC Vive or any of the other supported eye trackers. So here, this is the virtual shopping cart that will show up, allowing me to add that to my cart. And as soon as I add an article to my cart, it will disappear, this menu, right? So this is the information that will be displayed when I pick it up later. Again, you can customize that right here. We're not going to go too far into detail, but you can move this information up and down. You can add additional information right here. You can, again, remove that. You can change, you can change the size of this. You can change the color. You can display that, on the left side, the right side. So you can kind of, customize the way your observer, your consumer will be seeing those, that metadata. Okay. Great. So we are ready to start with a data acquisition. So first thing we're going to do right here is we're going to open up the dataset manager. And we are going to hit this start new dataset acquisition. So this is going to allow me to hand over, in this case, the mouse in just a little bit to my first consumer, and then he or she will be through the aisle looking at items, picking them up, purchasing, or putting them back on the shelf. So here I'm going to specify that this was Bart and male of 53 and C for Caucasian. Location was US, and we assigned that user a ID C290. In this case, again, I don't have eye tracking, so eye tracking is disabled. Here you can see another supported eye tracker, Tobii Pro. We're going to disable that and use the monitor and the mouse to start from the current position, start doing the tracking. So as we're doing the tracking, these menus are going to be a little bit in the way. So what I advise to do is to kind of move these to the side after you hit the start capture button. So off we go. Let's hit the start capture button, make sure that the clock is ticking, and let's move that out to the side. So at this point, we're going to use the spacebar to move forward and move to a certain location. In my aisle, the escape bar, and then I have the ability also to click on an object, to pick it up, and to look at this object. Now, you can see that these objects were still grouped. So if you don't want that, you can go ahead and break that group by doing that in your model browser. Right? So I'm going to hit the back button here, so I don't want that. I'm going to continue looking around. Coke right there. We are going to have a party this weekend, so we want some really good Belgian beer. So what I would definitely purchase right here, let's have a look at this, is this one right there. Price looks right. So let's go ahead and add that to my shopping cart. Great. Now I know that this is the Belgian variant of this, so the traditional way it looks, these cans look like. So let's go ahead and also purchase these. Now we also need some more specialized beer, so let's look around. Oh, right there, one of my all-time favorites, Triple Carmelite from the city of Dendermonde, where I was born. So let's definitely get a 6-pack of this. Let's look around some more, and let's zoom in with my space bar, zoom out again. We have some great La Trappe right here, which is a quadruple. Oh boy, this is going to be quite the party. So let's go ahead and add that to my shopping cart as well. Hit the space bar and move a little bit down that aisle right there. Look back over. Naturally, as you can tell, the movements are a little less smooth. As with eye tracking, it would be much more natural with eye tracking. Interested to see what this is. La Troll. And if the price would be attached, I would see that there. Depending on that, I would probably decide to put that back. And again, I would recommend to break these objects before we start this acquisition. So I think the acquisition is done. I've purchased everything I wanted to purchase. So I am going to come back to the data acquisition menu and hit the finish button here in the lower right-hand corner. So this will now finalize my very first acquisition right here, Bart, male. We can open up the menu to see all the actions that Bart has taken. So first he looked at the Coca-Cola for about 27 seconds. Then he moved on to Stella and purchased it. So we can see that here, the icon showing this was purchased. And so this keeps track of all the actions that the consumer did. Notice also the filter right here where we can go ahead and filter if it's a longer type acquisition. Okay, make sure the little toggle is active to have an active data set. And what we can do now is we can start interpreting visually that data set. So zooming out a little bit, I can already see on the floor, I can see some circles right here and some arrows. Again, we can go to a view mode and we're able to see the consumer walking right here up to there, then walking over here, and then moving down the store into this area right there and finalizing right here. So we can exit back that T mode. So these circles highlight how long the consumer was standing there. In the more settings, you have the ability right here to set, if we go back to the consumer insight module, we can show this as a heat map. This heat map will show you the longer a consumer was standing at a certain location, the warmer the color becomes. So from red all the way to blue. That is also an option right here that can be set in the more actions in the settings. So we can pick these colors depending on how you want to visualize that. And you can also change the size and the scale of those heat maps and the amount of detail that is visualized. So if you want to get very detailed or less detailed. Okay. So what's probably a good thing as well, now that we're here in this lower right-hand corner, is you see this gray toggle that allows you to render the background in grayscale as opposed to color. So this is a great way to kind of make that heat map stand out from those colors of the actual the products and the SKUs. So let's move over again to this side of the store, zoom out a little bit, look over and zoom out. So what we can do to evaluate this further is in the consumer insight mode, we now have two visualization modes. So the first one is what we call gazes. So gazes, by the way, only work with eye trackers. So in this demo scenario, this is not going to display anything here on my actual shelf. So I am limited to view actions. And then as I am displaying my actions, I can display those So in a heat map mode, you can see here in the middle of the screen, about halfway, you can see this timeline. Right? And so there's this play button right here, which is in the timeline, 20 seconds into my data capture. You can see that the consumer started to focus on the Coca-Cola right there. All right, so what you're also noticing here, the accumulation time is specified here is 3 seconds. So that's a window, 1.5 seconds before my current playhead and 1.5 seconds after my current playhead. So I like to kind of see a little more, have a little more buffer before and after that. So if you have two adjacent types of events, you're going to be able to see that, right? For example, here at this playhead, 1 minute and about 25 seconds into it, I can see that I started gazing over from the original Stella and my interest was captured by the other Stella, okay, the other type. And then this was the movement here between the Coca-Cola and the Stella right there. Notice the color right there. And this will also show me if the product was just viewed and put back, or if it was actually viewed and bought. So as you hover over this, you can see your product viewed and bought. Okay. So visualizing this again in a different way here is using the fixations. You can see here, the fixations shows me a circle. The size of the circle will determine how long a customer was looking at this, the consumer. And the value that you find inside there is the duration, in my case, of how long the consumer was looking at that. Again, remember earlier, I showed you in the settings menu that we can change that label, and instead of showing the duration, we can just specify an ID number, to see the sequence of those gazes as opposed to the duration of those gazes. We can set a filter, milliseconds, and the size of that circle, based on the total duration, in this case, 100%, representing 6.2 seconds. Okay, so if I want to combine this and go over here, I could hit the All button. So that means I want to see the total duration of my data acquisition capture, which was 200 seconds, as you can see here. So now, indeed, again, I can see, my consumer starting here, paused quite a long time, almost 27 seconds, then moved over here, 6.2 seconds, 8.75, then over here, and finally over there, right? So if you want to see that in a more sequential way, you can simply hit the play button and observe the changing of that feedback. Okay. So if you don't want to wait too long, you can go ahead and fast forward through here and look at it this way as well. Okay. We can move the timeline manually. You can move the timeline by entering the time here. And then finally, to conclude this demonstration here, as I said, this is a high-level overview, is our statistics. So this is where we can now start reporting on this specific consumer. And, we can see, okay, this consumer has spent, one time picking up this specific object right here, but did not purchase it, right? So we can report, we can generate statistics on the actions and the shopping behavior using a number of times picked up and bought, the average minimum maximum buying time, buying to pickup ratio, number of times it was put back, average minimum and maximum. Again, keep in mind the statistics listed up here are only available when you are using an actual physical eye tracker, so they are of no use for me right here. Looking at this, we can display also percentages right here. We can invert from least to most picked up. We can go ahead and start the brands containing Jupiler. So if you have a larger data set, this will make it much easier to kind of go through this massive amount of data and kind of, find exactly what you're looking for with that filter. Down here, we have a pie chart or a bar chart showing me the feedback. So if I look at buying time, average buying time, for example, I can see my Jupiler took the longest time for somebody to decide, as where this one was a no-brainer for the customer. So less time here is better. We can now use that data. We can also view this in the actual 3D, so it'll highlight it in here. and we can start reporting on this by exporting this data. So this could be, BME, this specific session. So this would be more like a general session with X number of participants, 0303, and that was in my US location. And we're going to save that on the desktop. As I export, I can export all these different metadata tags into my CSV file, indicate the separator, and then you'll find right here your final CSV file, which can be used to report using Microsoft BI or pivot tables or any other tool. So in this case, we have the pickup count right here and the pickup ratio for these different products. Great. Again, if you want to demo this with the actual gazes, then I would recommend downloading the massive predetermined store visualizer. If you want, you can also load right here data sets. So I have saved, for example, a data set of my family right here. So we have Bart, we have a female right here, 5259, and we then have a female consumer, 1557. So you can go ahead and start displaying the data of those consumers. But again, this data set was captured for a specific type store. So when you do that, you want to make sure that you save your project, or you export your project and then save that data set together with that repository. Also worth mentioning, this is cloud-based user click charge. So again, going back to what I mentioned earlier in my demonstration, the Store Visualizer CI satellite site will allow a different remote location from opening this project that I can save in the cloud, do their own data set management and acquisition by starting to capture. This could be done with eye tracking. And then we can, kind of aggregate all that data from our different locations around the world into one set. So this is really great because it allows you to go beyond geographical borders. Last but not least, using your share and approve, you can also, your cloud-based setup, you can also see your clicks. So if you go to transactions, you'll be able to see how many transactions that you did. I don't have any transactions currently, but if I would go to this, for example, you can see that, depending on which day of the week, you'll be able to see how many times you have performed this consumer insight, how many times you invoked this. So that's a great cloud-based model running behind this Store Visualizer. One more thing before I let you guys go is more information can be found on www.esko.com support blended learning. Hit the Store Visualizer button right here and hit the What's New, which will start this training course, allowing you to go way, way more into detailed than what we've seen here in this half hour, talking about how to set up, how to do data acquisitions, how to visualize, and how to generate the statistics. So here, for example, you'll be able to see, some of that information that I was not able to display here using the gazes, and then starting the timeline. And then in just a few seconds here, you'll start seeing these heat maps being displayed on the actual aisle. Let's fast forward a little bit. There you go. So I hope you're able to see that right here. So again, this gives you a much more interactive type of feedback. And as you're doing this, you can also start zooming in on a specific area in your store. So here, as we're looking at this, you can start looking at these heat maps and this dynamic aggregation. So looking at these averages and stuff like that. So this I'll send also a link in the recording link to a OneDrive repository where you can download this store as well as the data source. So that data source will have two eye tracking consumers in there. So you can see here number 2 and number 3. Those were two data acquisitions that were done with a tracker, and all the rest were just regular acquisitions without. Okay, I hope that this was useful. With this information, you will be able to start playing around with this store visualizer planogram as well as the new consumer insight module. Thanks for your time and hope you enjoyed this.